and all who are looking for barista employment. One woman I know is a radio engineer and such, can't find work. She actually was trying to get a job at a cafe and she's competing against other young women who are coming along who have resumes of working in cafes. I mean, so she's kind of outclassed in that sense. They line up for jobs. They'll settle for less. Labor settles for less. Unions take cutbacks or are completely broken. Recessions do something else. They roll back small businesses or smaller businesses, not just mom and pop stores, but you have a big multinational taking over another big, fairly big multinational, but this constant concentration and merger of businesses. Well, you can start picking up other businesses at bargain prices if they're at the edge of bankruptcy and the like. So the big companies tighten their grip on their particular industry. Again, it's a kind of a self-devouring thing. One of the things I've decided, I'm going to make a universal declaration. I haven't done that much research on it. But I've decided that one of the things that leads to the end of every civilization, we're talking about class-structured civilization, from ancient Egypt with the pharaohs and whatever else, one of the things that leads to the destruction is when the ruling class, the owning class, becomes too successful in its pursuit. Because its pursuit, its single-minded pursuit, is the expropriation of surplus value of other people's wealth. There's only one thing that the owning classes and the ruling classes have ever wanted throughout history. Only one thing, and that's everything. They want all the herds, all the meadows, all the resources, all the mines and minerals. They want all the ports. They want all the services. They want all of this being done for them. They want all the comforts and services of civic society without having to pay any of the costs. That's all they want. They want it all. We have a lot. We want more. We can get it all. And they are driven. They are driven to doing this. So the great American prosperity we had was really a relatively short period. It was in my lifetime and in the lifetime of, well, certainly none of the women in the audience, but a few of the old guys I can see. You remember it too. And that was from 1947 to about 1980, when the Ronald Reagan started the process of rollback, and that process is going on right to this day. But 1947, I remember my dad and my Uncle Joe saying during World War II, toward the end of the war, saying, when the war ends, we're going to have a depression again. They had just been through 15 years of depression before the war, 1929 to 1941. 42. And I said, why is that, Dad? Why? He said, well, all the money that they're spending now on the war is a pump. It creates all these big jobs. Your Uncle Nick, who can't hold down a job, is in the defense industry making $100 a week. I mean, $100 a week for an Italian New York working class family. That was like, we arrived. That was it, the American dream. Money. But it was making guns, and they'll close the gun shops. He said, and then you're going to have millions of other guys coming back from the war, and there'll be no jobs for them, and this and that. And everybody did expect a super crash at the end. But then certain things happened by 47. First, what they didn't understand was that during the war years, a lot of people made a lot of good money, as Uncle Nick, he spent it all in nightclubs, but other people saved money. You often got money and you had nothing to buy. You couldn't buy a new refrigerator. They weren't making any more refrigerators during World War II. You couldn't buy a new car. They weren't making any cars. They were making tanks and planes and guns. You couldn't buy many things, you know. So a lot of people were making good money and saving it. So there was this immense reserve of consumer demand. The second thing that happened was the military spending kept up. In 47, Truman started pumping back big money in and stopped the demobilization, and you had this stimulus package I was talking about. The third thing that happened at that time was a thing called the GI Bill, which was amazing, where 6 million American boys, these were guys who never dreamed that they would be able to go to college, and suddenly there was the opportunity to go to college, to train professionally, and there was a tremendous input into the whole economy of these professions and these talents and these energies and efforts, which actually brought this amazing prosperity. So what you got by the 1950s, you had working class people owning their own homes, all right, with a mortgage to pay and all that, and owning their own cars. That was not the automatic American way, you see. That was really a relatively new thing. Before that, before 1947, and before that, you had a depression of the worst sort. And before that, you had in America in the 1920s, 1910s, you had in America where you had diphtheria epidemics in Baltimore, where you had hunger, where you had slums in every city, where you had underemployment across the whole country, where farmers were losing their farms. You had a third world. America was in 1900, 1910, 1920. It was a third world country before the term had ever been invented. So this great prosperity we hear about, I mean, there was a dream. I mean, some people could get a chunk of land and farm and do okay on it, and some people could open up a little business in their ethnic community and do okay on it or whatever. But for the most part, life was really very tough. And this idea that we've had this great prosperity for a long time isn't true. It was 1947 until the 1980s and declining ever since. And to the extent that there was some material security and that it extended to middle and working class people, it's not because of free market capitalism, but despite it. That there was a new deal that came along, and it put in things like conservation, it put in things like Social Security, which was not only a retirement plan, but a disability and a survivor's plan also. It created all sorts of standards and protections that people hadn't had before. So those liberal critics who say that they don't deplore capitalism, they deplore what it has become. Like Michael Moore in that movie he made, when they said, "Are you against capitalism?" He said, "Well, I'm against what it's become." There's an image of a good old capitalism, a really homey mom-pop capitalism that we're talking about, not these big greedy murderous corporations. And I'm thinking, what's the good old capitalism that we've lost our way from? That was his phrase, we've lost our way. In 1900, when people worked 12-hour days, and children too, when most people in North America and much of Western Europe lived in third world conditions, when foods and drinking water were contaminated and medical care was unavailable for most. And so what people are noticing is that today there is a return, a moving back toward third world society. And that's their goal. The goal, as I said in 1989, I had never heard anyone else say it, but George Herbert Walker Bush, the old man, was president of the United States. Bush Sr. was president, and I said his goal is the third worldization of America. And I've expanded it to say also that today the goal is the third worldization of everywhere. It's happening. These cutbacks and rollbacks are even happening in the social democracies like Finland, Denmark, Sweden, Norway, and these countries which have terrific social programs. And these are victories of democracy against an unregulated, untrammeled, irresponsible capitalism. But what's been happening now in the last 10, 15 years is an additional 1.47 billion workers have entered the world corporate market. And I'm talking about China, some of India, Russia, Eastern Europe, and a number of other places. And so the surplus of labor that's come in, the number of people looking for jobs and such, has really gone down. So that's what we're facing. I'm sorry, I don't want to be, if I haven't, just in case I haven't depressed you enough, let me add another point, and that is the crises that capitalism brings toward the environment. that in its essence, in its productivity, in its ideology, in its narrative, in its mythologies, in its Adam Smith gospel stories and such,